Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second part of looking at Woodside. As you'll probably all maybe remember, that's the old corn mill down at Woodside when it was Dickinson's scrapyard. Might have been just taken when Dickinson's closed because all these windows have now been bricked up, but obviously all the vehicles are still there. When he's come, I'm showing this photograph a bit later on and how it looks today as well. So let's have a look at the end of what I was looking at on Thursday when we talked about the rope works here. So if you get your sort of bearings, this is Oakford Terrace down there, but leads into Horsforth Woods across the other side there. We mentioned about the wool pack and about the Woodside Tavern. That's there. We see on here Broadgate Lane going up here. That's Providence Chapel there. We talked about the Methodist Chapel, or Free United, as it says there. So this was this map is 1906, so it probably surveyed a year before, and I think it was an update of another map as well. The 1892 map shows no properties here at all. What came after here is where the Springfield estate was built on in the 1920s and 1930s, because the rope works had gone by then in 1907. So there are actually 3 rope works on this map. I can show you the other one here, just by the side of a quarry over there. Is a very small rope works there called Clayton Wood Ropery. Further over here, that's one of the ponds of the quarry of Clayton Woods. But just a bit further over was a massive bleach works, and attached to that bleach works was a ropery as well, even bigger than the Springfield rope works. I just couldn't get it on to get the right size and things like that. So there's really within half a mile of one another. There were 3 rope works along here. I've only looked at this one because I've when I come to the 1880s next week, I'll probably mention some of the people and some of the things that went on in industry. We don't find out much, as I've complained before, is they've written roundabout really what went on in the community and not within the industry at all. So this one, all I know is on the Monday, the 20th of February, 1882, it burnt down. And because it was owned by a chap called Joseph Parkin. Joseph was actually at that time the chairman of the local board. And I think he might have been well on his deathbed at the time, because there's quite a lot of concern about his health, and I don't think they would have made that sort of concern if it hadn't been very, very serious. It's said that he lived in sight of the rope works. My guess is that he might have lived, whether that's a house or not, I don't know, or one of these other ones were. So I guess he lived down there, because, I mean, these Woodvilles here are red terrace houses, because they wouldn't have been in the 1880s, wouldn't have been built there anyway. Springfield Mount Across over there wouldn't have existed either. So maybe he did live on the premises around here, because he was ill and laid up in bed, so the fire took place at 4 a.m. in the morning. It's a Monday morning. So really it was when the first staff was coming in here. And I guess he might have had to fire up a boiler or something like that to get all the machinery working or something. He accidentally knocks over a lamp in the storeroom. I think he wanders off or something like that. And but in that storeroom, they store some oil and other things like that. The oil catches fire, burns the place down. But what we do know is that it was a stone two-story building at that time, employing 50 people. So it was actually quite a large manufacturing business in Horsforth at that time. These other mills, because they were all smaller affairs, and I've read about them, they employed about 100, at a push 200 people. So it was quite a large employer down there. Fortunately, he was insured, but only for £3,000, which doesn't seem much today. And he rebuilt those works. And that's probably what we see here, is that rebuilding. I've no idea what it looked like, whether he could restore that 2-story building made of stone, could have been an expensive building, or whether he rebuilt something cheaper in brick or whatever. So that's all I know really about the Springfield rope works down there, because they're a large one across there. So let's pop further down here. We can see Broadgate Lane coming across here. The ring road will come right across here and across there. So that's what we're going to look at next. It's quite interesting if you go down there, is that you can see here, we're going to look at the corn mill, is how the corn mill dam stretched all the way up, right up to where the bowling green is, as it says there. I think that was built in 1895. I think I mentioned last time about the bowling club being established there. So that's what really cut across here. And so let's have a look at the next slide. It's coming down to the Woodside Tavern. Now, I mentioned it last time, and that the owners were applying for planning permission and to the transfer of a license from the old Woodside Tavern, which stood next to the Woolpack, so the two pubs together, to move down here, because this is the in the early 1930s, 1934, and that's when the ring road had been was being built, and parts of it had been finished at that time. Their license was under review by the Skyrack licensing sessions, who thought there were probably too many pubs, and especially two next door to one another on Low Lane. But I think when they saw the plans for this, that it wasn't going to be a typical pub as they would imagine. It was more maybe as a family type thing, which I think it always did remain in that sort of 1930s build. And it said it was built to serve those people in cars coming along there, and it may be sort of even then more food orientated than rather as a drinking hole around there. So we'll just have a look at this bit of film here where Alan comes across the Woodside Tavern and crosses across the road towards the corn mill. I'm going to say I'm sorry about some of the sound on here, but if there's a problem today, I've checked it, and even the audio levels when I played it last week were fine. So whether I didn't tick that box to play it through you, but I'm going to say if the audio is bad, I'll see if I can do something, but I might not be able to do. I'm going to say I've tested it to make sure.
And I'm walking across the car park of Woodside Tavern now. This place was built to replace the old tavern up the road with the coming of the ring road in the 1930s. In actual fact, I am walking on the site of the old corn mill dam. My young days used to stretch all this way across here, but with the coming of this road made a world of difference to Horsforth. Just look at it now, the massive amount of traffic. I've got to cross the road at last. The shops on the other side of the road, the first one used to be a fishmonger's, Fishy Firths, and the next door was Ben Sutcliffe, the butcher. Now we've arrived at the top of Corn Mill Fold. The road down to the old corn mill and the cottages. All we now see is all the new flats being built. In the bottom is the old corn mill itself. Corn mill was built in 1787 by William Wright. Corn milling finished in the late 19th century and then went through various uses, latterly as Dickinson's scrapyard until 2001, when it was sold for housing. A planning condition being that the mill should be restored. Well, the site was cleared in 2005, the flats built. Then in 2015, the property developer was granted permission to knock down the remains of the building and build an office block.
So coming back to the corn mill, then, as Alan said, it was was eventually demolished, all the property around it. And there are a lot of cottages around it as well. And even really at the turn of the 20th century, those were being condemned. But it still seems that some of those cottages were still there in the First World War because they were used for firefighting practice. and like I say, that's how they all went. But really, out of some of those cottages, that we see the formation of the Wesleyan Society, the Methodists around there, taking place in one of those cottages. It must have been quite a large cottage, because after that, it was used in the sort of 1880s for a temperance society as well. They had their own temperance band down there as well, to stop people, like I say, right at the bottom of Woodside Hill, to stop all those people drinking from around there. So I guess these bands went and played and things like that, and they had quite large meetings down there as well. So that's what's happening in that sort of cottages. Because the mill belonged to the Wright family, and they weren't just millers, but they're also fellmongers. These are the people that went round trading in animal skins, and it's really probably how they made most of their money. And so it's not quite surprising is that with a butcher down there, a chap called Watson, these two families really developed the tanning industry down in Woodside. The tanning industry started off by the Watson family in 1816, as we'll see on the later photograph further up there as well. Alan mentioned there about 2015, where we sort of must have updated that part of the film around there. And what happened since then was they wanted to create the old corn mill, this L-shaped development, into an office block. But the problem was the conversion costs of that, where they sort of work on how much they can rent it out per square foot, and the cost of the conversion, maybe being £1 million or something like that, is that it didn't equate to a business solution for this. So really what happened is that they took most of this down. As you see on this next photograph, if you look at this, we've got the arch there that led into the properties. We've got a small window above it, and we've got these two side windows as well. You can't really see the side profile here, but that part is a lean-to against the other part of the mill coming out there. And if today it's a public right-of-way, you can actually walk down here on a bit of grass embanking. As you see on the next photograph, you can't fully see the whole of the property, but you can see the majority of it. And if you come round the corner here, you can still see that lean-to against the more modern apartment they built there. You can walk around here because just over here comes down Oil Mill Beck, where those trees are down there. They've actually put in a metal bridge down there, and you can cross across that metal footbridge and walk the embankment onto the ring road around there. So this is what it looks like today. So you can see roughly that it's got that same sort of look. And even if you stand there, it's that half roof. So they actually didn't demolish the whole lot. I guess they took it down and then rebuilt it. But this build onto the side of it, that is a completely modern block. And I think that was finished in 2019. So really 10 years after that development had really started. Took an awful long time for that to happen, because it commenced the building in 2010. They cleared the site, as Alan said, between 2005 to 2007, largely because of the Dickinson scrapyard being on there, is that all the oil and petrol and whatever it is out of those engines went into the ground, so they had to take the ground off. And there's a problem then, because really when this corn mill was built, it wasn't built with foundations. And so it was really built onto the soil around there as well. And that was part of the problem of it. So let's look at the next section. Is Woodside Hill. We just looked down there where those chimneys are. That's the low lane continuing round here to the bottom of Tanhouse Hill around here, which was actually the main road down at that time. They pushed through the other road down there, I think in the 1960s, early 1970s, because it's so dangerous coming around here to the corner where the bridge inn is further down there. And there's always been a tannery around here. I guess it was until it was sort of demolished in the I think 1980s or something like that, when it came to an end. First owned by the Watson family, and then later on in the 19th century owned by the Pickard family. And they were producing leather around here because they'd been needed enormous amounts of sort of oak bark for the tanning process, but it was a very, very smelly process, although it looks all right on this photograph, is that these hides came in with the hair on the backs of the animals, so that had to be scraped off. Then the skin had to be put in great vats as well to get rid of the fat and other types of things. And all this was incredibly smelly, use of sort of various different types of things around there to get rid of it. So that's sort of Woodside Hill coming up there. So we're really at the bottom of Outwood Lane here as well. I'm not going that far on it. I'm only just going as far as the Methodist Chapel. And because you can see two parts of it here, we've got what's now today is used as the hall. That was the original chapel. Like I said, the first met in the corn fold further down the hill, came up here and built this in 1839, or opened in 1839. The names of those people, like I said, the Watsons and other people's names on that, all the sort of local sort of businessmen around there, and others as well. They built the new chapel in 1895, and largely as a result of another family that moved in, the Whittaker family. They came in and moved and initially lived down in that corn mill fold in one of those cottages. Like I say, they came sort of very, very wealthy. They made their money from quarrying. They had the quarries over where Horsforth Estate stands today. You can see on that earlier map, I don't know if you could quite see it, but they quarried on either side of the railway line. I think they probably set off in the late 1860s, 1870s on that, but it became a massive concern. And so it wasn't only the quarrying of stone up there, but there were also a brickworks there, and they also had an engineering workshop there, making cranes and machinery as well up on that site. It wasn't the only quarry they had. They had other quarries in the sort of the west side of Leeds neighbourhood as well. But that's where their principal quarry was. They lived a bit further on Outwood Lane than I'm going, really only to sort of to the right of this photograph, where there's some rather grand houses, and the brothers built 4 properties there, all next to really one another. I think they might be semi-detached in a way, but in fact there were 4 large houses there effectively, and they still stand there today. And I guess they built those in the probably the early 1890s or something like that. And it was them that was instrumental in the chapel that we see here, built in 1895. I think they both bought the land and also gave the stone for the construction of that. So really when that opened is that the earlier chapel of 1839 then became the hall, and I say still used for that today as well. And I think it had a bit of a Sunday school in it and other things like that. So some of these other people, because I mentioned the Whittaker family, but there was also John Hartley Blackburn. Quite unusually, he lived at Bank House, which is now the side of a ring road on Broadway, which is an insurance company there today. I'm going to say there were chapels nearer to him, the Grove upon Town Street, a short walk away. So maybe he felt that he could be more influential down here, or whether he did business with these other people like the Whittakers. Another man was down here who was helped fund this chapel, was Alfred Briggs, and his son was Cooper Briggs. I've mentioned him a few times. He was a builder himself, and he also was instrumental in getting the cenotaph built in 1920 as well. He was the man who opened Broadway Hall as a, well, funnily enough, that was the Hartley Blackburn's Bank House that later became Broadway Hall. So these were the types of families here. They've sort of made quite a bit of money, really within that construction industry within Horsforth itself. So let's have a look at a bit of a film here that with Alan again, really setting off, coming up Woodside Hill up as far as the chapel and then to the tannery.
But before we get there was Houseman's blacksmith's shop. We used to come here to get our iron hoops and bowls made that we used to run round the streets with. Also, the old sledge runners for the sledges. In made them all for us here. We're now outside Woodside Methodist Church, built in the 1800s. The principal families along here were the Whitakers, who built 4 big houses along the road here, which are still there. The quarry owners had a big quarry at the bottom of Butcher Hill here, and above it was another engineering works owned by the Whitakers. And Dennis Whitaker was one of the first men to build a boring machine, and I think it was in the 1930s that started the first boring of a channel tunnel, and it's preserved now down by the entrance to the tunnel. And also, when we were in St James's churchyard, we saw one of the Whitaker family graves there. This is the old road that led down to Butcher Hill Bridge. Here on my left, the old stones are what's part of the old Picart's tannery. There were fields here on the other side of the road. And kids, lovely, the smell of oak bark that was piled in these fields for the tanning process that went on here. The smell, you could smell it way down here in Woodside, but these are what's left of the old buildings. Now this road is blocked off, but we think that this road came all the way up from Newley, the crossing at Newley, along Outwood Lane, down here, across the bridge, and up into West Park and Headingley to the old Wapentake.
It's coming down by the side of the Bridge Inn pub. I got these the wrong way round really, but we'll talk about Mather's Mill as well, that is coming straight across. This is the last mill to be built in Horsforth, and the largest one as well. Construction started in sort of 1903, and one man or boy died in that, falling off some scaffolding, unfortunately, down there. Some people call it the new mill as well, because the Mathers didn't actually have it very long. They had it sort of until about 1910, 1911. I think I mentioned before a Great Depression in industry, really running right up to World War I when that started as well. A lot of people being made unemployment from these places. Fortunately, whoever bought it in 1911, 1912 was onto a good thing. Obviously, they didn't know World War I was going to break out, but it went into full production after that and remained so for quite a long time as well. And because it was sold in 1927 to Lister Brothers, who are worsted spinners, and because they produced parachutes during the Second World War. The mill closed in 1962. Quite often, lots of these mills closed 58 to 1961, largely because there was an overcapacity in Britain because of the cheaper imports coming in from Turkey and elsewhere. And actually, the government in 1958 said that they would give sums of money for actual mills to close down, because a lot of these mills at that time in the 50s had Victorian machinery in them, and so they weren't sort of competitive in that way as well, so it sort of held them back, and actually gave grants for those companies who were willing to get rid of all that Victorian machinery and put in new machinery as well, probably electric looms and larger looms, and then to go on to using different types of fabrics that were the ones that exist today, largely done sort of flame retardant fabrics and other things like that, or very high quality fabrics. And so that's how it really sort of went. And then latterly, the last owners of that were a company called Games Tech. They supplied slot machines and video games to pubs and things like that. The mill was then bought in 2012 and got planning permission. I think Games Tech moved over onto the sort of West Park Ring Road, somewhere around there. But I think the problem was that they had initially was that the development behind that, the core mill development, hadn't, because they'd been fully completed. And I think they waited until there was a demand for housing after that had filled up. And so we see the development of this, and I think it only opened in really probably 2019, or it's completed fully in 2019. So really probably a 5-year process that took to convert into apartments. So as I could say, there's tons of these apartments around here, because I think in that Corn Mill Foldland, there's 100 odd down there as well. In fact, there's actually fantastic views from some of these windows looking up the Woodside Valley. So whoever's got them looking northwards has probably got quite a good view. And here, I guess, a Woodview Terrace. This is the road, took rather a long time to complete, Horsforth Road. The problem was, as we see, as Alan mentioned, is that the road that came round here was this Butcher Hill Road was the main road to Leeds. And so everything from Horsforth, it obviously could go on Scotland Lane to join Otley Old Road and join it in occasional places. But this was really the main, coming across in front of the mill up here was the main road. And in order for these sort of manufacturers to develop, instead of going up Butcher Hill, which is obviously an arduous thing and was quite a long way round to Leeds, is that they wanted to join the A65 at the other end. It'd been talked of for a long time, and it actually took a long time to build as well. I think it got we decided to build it in 1883, but it didn't open until 1886, I think something like June of that year. And it also really it did bankrupt the local board as well, because no one really done a sort of a calculation on the cost of this. They said it was going to cost £800. And they're quite lucky, because this belonged to the Cardigan estate, the other side. And they thought that it'd be a good thing for them as well, maybe to open up some development land that they owned along the side of Horsforth Road. As we'll see a bit later on, there was a mill there as well, a paper mill. And so I guess it was just a muddy track at one time. So they gave the contract in 1883 to build a road, which I think was 24 feet wide, because they wanted to save money. You say it's now, I think it's a 36-foot length, but they let the contract and then said, oh, we want it to be bigger, and never readjusted for the cost of that. And so 1886 being completed, but the proviso was from the Cardigan estate, we will give the land for nothing, as long as you lay down the sewer and water pipes at the same time, then we'll waive the fee for that, which I think was £130, as recognising that the land belonged to the Cardigan estate. They will give all the stone for the building of the road and the wall along here as well, and would also at the end give £500. So that's why the local board thought they'd be clear at £1,300, wouldn't have much materials to find as well. But like I say, the proviso was in 1886 is that it had to meet the standards of what the Cardigan estate wanted. Their surveyor or whoever it was came along here, pushed his umbrella through this wall here and said that it wasn't good enough and that they had to rebuild it. So I guess the mortar was very poor, or didn't have the right mixture on it as well. And eventually the precept, the rate, which was set every 6 months, had to be raised in order to make the local board financially solvent, because they were down, I think they were minus £1,500 at one point, way beyond the overdraft they had at the bank. And because this was anathema to really all those businessmen who were sat on the board at the time. Anyway, that's slightly jumping ahead. So these Woodview Terrace wasn't built until, I guess, probably about 1888, 1890 or something like that. So that's the sort of date of that we have. So going forwards onto this next photograph, probably in slightly the wrong order here, the Bridge Inn. I'm sure there must have been some sort of pub before this was built, because this opened in 1868, the landlord being Bill Wood at the time. And so I'd imagine with the amount of people living around here, and because there were more labouring classes down here as well, working in the corn mill and the other mills as well, that there must have been something else as well around here. So we're going to cross the road now, and across the bridge, which probably gives its name to Oil Mill Beck, because sometimes it's called Oil Mill Bridge around here. There's nothing spectacular about it. It's just a fairly plain stone-built bridge, but it leads across to the other side into Horsforth Wood. And there's quite a lot of interest in here, as we'll see on this next piece of film. This is where Alan goes down here. We look across onto Horsforth Road, where this paper mill stood. It did have quite a lot of problems, largely resulting from the bleach works that stood, I guess, where McDonald's is on the ring road, or in that area. Their effluent, or the waste from the dye works, was actually went down into Oil Mill Beck, and it meant that this chap in the paper mill down here couldn't make white paper. And he solved this problem. I think it was in the 1830s when that's how far back we're going. He solved this problem, as Alan will show you, by channeling water from these woods and across to the mill. Those channels, we can still see in the woods as well. And he also looks further on at the where the monks of Kirkstall Abbey took water off in their goit, and that went down to by the side of a Vesper Gate, where that rugby field is, which is their fish pond.
I'm now going to take the path through Horsforth Woods. We're now heading down to the last mill in the valley, which used to be originally a paper mill. It's situated on Horsforth Road. This mill took the water from Oil Mill Beck, but the water became so polluted with the mills upstream that they had to find their own source of water, which they did. They took it from a spring in the wood. Well, we've now arrived at the site of what was the old settling pit, where the spring water was brought down here to settle before it was taken into the paper mill. We've got to go back into the wood and hopefully find the old aqueduct spouting. Now in front of us we can see the mill itself. The old part of it is stone, and of course the new part is brick. Here we are. This is the aqueducting that carry the water from the spring. Two nice pieces here that brought the clear water for his paper making. All hand carved. Must have stretched quite probably what 50-60 yards easily to those settling pits. Let's hope we're lucky and find where the source of the spring is. Here we are. Here's the old ducting flowing away from me, and here above me is the source of the spring. This aqueduct taking the fresh water to Cooper's paper mill must have been about 50 to 75 yards, all hand cut. The stream has taken another course down here now because of the old aqueduct being blocked. But at least this is it. We found the source. In front of me is a weir that takes the beck further downstream towards the Aire Valley, and where I am sat is the foss. The foss, we are told, was built by the monks, but it is written that it was given by Nigel de Horsforth for the monks who owned this land. There was a Norman in 1132 in Horsforth here. This fosse led down the side of the main road, which is further downstream, and led water to where the playing fields are and the car park by Abbey House Museum. In some cases it is said that it was built for the forge, but we're not quite sure about that. I'm still following the path between the fosse and the beck. The fosse is here on my left hand side, flows away down this way towards the A65. The main road, or the new road as we call it, must have veered to the left and away down towards Kirkstall Abbey. Well, on my right hand side there's a steep drop down into the beck, and that follows on down, falls down the valley here towards the Aire Valley and underneath the A65.
We're going to cross the A65 now, and this is what the A65 is carried on, and it's a huge bridge this is. And you'll see on the bit of film is that Alan looks down it, and as I say, the drop down here must be 40 or 50 foot at least, and like I say, it's an unseen bridge really, and everybody travels across it every day with thousands of cars. And obviously we've got the Oil Mill Beck coming through there, and then we're almost at the end, and this is the sewage works. I always get confused between how to spell sewage works. I've checked it out today. Sewerage means the filter beds, the drainage pipes and things like that, the physical things that carry sewage, which is the water and other things in it down there. So that's the difference between sewage, S-E-W-A-G-E, and sewerage with the R in it as well. And so there's a great problem really in that to everywhere in Victorian times was a supply of clean water. Horsforth water, we've looked at before, was on the reservoirs on Scotland Lane, really high up on the same type, on the back going down the bottom of the valley. The three reservoirs up there, and one of them sort of covered largely by the golf course, and say the runway comes to the end of the other. So you can walk up there and basically on the Leeds Country Way and see a part of what were the reservoirs. And where there's a house down there just off that poor bend and it slopes down, that was a waterworks house up there. But we've mentioned that before. And that's where it was a private waterworks concern, where they were more concerned about profit than anything else. The consumer was the last to be thought of. And all sorts of stuff came down. It was always brown with bits in it. People said it was undrinkable, and they're going to say this is the 1880s, 1890s, 1910s, 1920s, but until the well, I can't say the 1920s, but eventually is that it was bought off the private water companies by the Urban District Council. They overpaid for it and then had to spend an enormous amount of money to make it the water to be clear and drinkable. But prior to that is that really sort of sewage ran in open gutters in Horsforth. So they all went downwards to join water courses, and then it would go into Oil Mill Beck or straight into the river and to be carried away. It caused a lot of problems. The local board didn't want to spend any money at all. They thought it was folly, and if they could get someone else to pay for it, all the better. But they were sort of caught out in a way. They'd actually put a drain in, a sort of a large sewer. Its outfall was just out of a pipe at the end onto Oil Mill Beck, just over here. The Kirkstall Forge development is around there. The A65 is down here. I took this photograph in about 2008 or something like that, 2009. But you can see part of the end of the filter bed, so it had all gone. But you can see this sort of embanking that they put around here. And so they bought this land down here in the 1880s, and it cost them about £22,000 to develop it down here. There weren't easy things to do, largely because of the different technologies different companies were using. So the local board, they went out to Harrogate, they went to Ilkley and to other places to see how they went about it and which was the best method to do. The people they were speaking to proposed a completely different method, and someone had to, I think, go down to Northampton to have a look at that because it's the only one they'd installed that was working. But I think they came back and decided that the Ilkley method, largely the standard method, was part of that. And so in the sort of 1883 to 1885, they put down the sewers on every road in Horsforth. I think it caused all sorts of problems. I mentioned this when they come to the 1880s, because there's very little street lighting. People fell into the trenches. Some of these trenches were 20 feet deep in order to get the right level, obviously, to the for the flow of it. And because people wanted to link up straight away, but the local board refused because they said it didn't belong to them until the sewage works had been paid off. And because this is a problem when nearly went bankrupt with building Hawksworth Road, is that the sewage people were down here building this at the same time. And I think there's rather a large influx of Irish labourers, the navvies that came in here. I guess they sort of, the people who came off building the railway tunnels and things like that, found employment with all these waterworks and reservoirs being built at that time. There was a massive fight down here. It estimated about 100 people fighting with shovels and other things like that. The police were nowhere to be seen, or they probably looked from a distance and disappeared and just thought they'd let them fight it out themselves. So that was part of it. And like I say, they refused for people to link up straight away, even though they dug the trenches. Then householders had to go and had their own trenches redug to meet the sewers. It was a sort of a madness type of thing. But they were really pushed into it, largely because Leeds complained. Quite oddly, really, because they really had no sewage works at all. Bradford complained, even though obviously the water went down, we were downstream from Bradford, and they were really putting pressure on a lot of these places in between. I guess so that they didn't have to spend as much money on sewage works as if other people had bought these. When it arrived down in Leeds, perhaps it had been cleared, and therefore they could complain is that it was Bradford water or Horsforth water or wherever it was, Carvely water, whatever it was, that was being contaminated. And in the end, they sort of pushed Horsforth into it by saying they're going to build a sewage works at Newley. And they're going, we're not having a sewage works at Newley because why should all Leeds water be pumped up to there to Newley? And then they went to Leeds and they went, well, actually, if you're going to build a sewage works, can Horsforth use it? And they said no, because you know, Horsforth isn't as part of Leeds. And so in a way, they had to build their own sewage works. And that's really what happened down here with the filter beds and things like that, settling tanks and other things. And then later on, they put a destructor down here, as I mentioned before, to burn waste paper and all sorts of other things to stop it blowing around Horsforth when the dustbin men came around and dumped it on the former Crag Hill quarry around there. And I guess glass bottles came down here to be recycled and all sorts of other things. So it was a well-used site. Not so happy for the people who, when the wind was in the wrong direction and lived down at Newley in these villas, then had to contend with the smell of the sewage works, as well as the sort of oil works and steel works and dye works all in the valley bottom there, as well as the railway coming down there. So this, I think it came decommissioned probably in the 1990s. I think not too long before I took this, but they took all the filter beds away and all these sort of apparatus. And I think people keep putting in planning to try and build houses on here as well. I guess they're probably thinking if the Kirkstall Forge development takes place, which is sort of partially housed, but I just read in the paper this week, is that it doesn't seem to have got full planning permission for building all those other properties down there. And it sort of had interim planning permission, and now they've gone to full planning permission for building those down there. So I guess that work probably can start next year or something like that, a mixture between offices and houses down there. And I guess rather like the Clarion development that we've seen higher up off Carveley Lane, is that will spread to include other areas. So I guess is that that's why this is up. But I guess the whole area would have to be dug up and leveled really to get rid of all these contaminants, because I guess you don't really want to live on a former sewage works. But I guess like down at Clarion is that when they built those houses, they're worried about contaminants in the land and actually build them on concrete rafts so that the houses aren't ever into contact with the subsurface around there. So I guess this type of thing would happen around here. Rain Road is a track that runs down the side of a sewage works from the A65 and goes round to join Newley Road at the end of Newley Bridge. You can walk along there, but I don't know if that's a private road or it's just some sort of footpath or bridleway or something like that. Maybe not as far beyond the sewage works entrance, because they put some stumps up down there so traffic can't go through there. But it did cause a problem when we come to look at the 1880s next week, is that they wanted to put up a pedestrian bridge at the bottom of Rain Road going round towards Newley Road because of the toll on Newley Bridge. And there's quite a few complaints from one gentleman called Mr. Micklethwaite, said that he owned the area around there when in fact he didn't. He was trying to do everything to stop people from paying to go across his bridge, because he made rather a lot of money out of it, because I really wanted to go across to Newley Station or to work the other side. So it's he was making a lot of money out of that by putting up a pedestrian bridge between the local, funded by the local board, and the Midland Railway Station at Newley, is that he wouldn't earn a penny from that. But it did happen, and I'll talk about that next week, because it was quite a story in itself. But let me just show the last piece of film here, just coming down to the confluence of Oil Mill Beck with the River Aire.
I've now got down to cross the very busy A65 road. Along here, but you may not realise it, you cross another bridge. You've got to look over the wall and see the massive embankment that must be 50 or so foot high to see where Oil Mill Beck runs through and drops down towards the River Aire. Now I find myself on this little known last bridge in Horsforth. Connects the sewage works to the river. For thousands of years this water has flowed down the beck, providing work for thousands of people. Here it empties into the River Aire and then down through the centre of Leeds into the Humber and out into the North Sea.
So that's the end of our visit down Woodside. One thing I will mention there, when we looked at that channeling in the wood, if you're going to look for that, it's quite difficult, but it's on the middle path that goes through it. Because if you come in from either end of the woods, is that quite soon is that a path, if you're coming up from the A65, a lower path goes to the left. The middle path goes straight ahead, and there's a path to the right. which goes slightly higher up. You all end up at the same place, of course, around either end. So the channeling can be seen on the middle path. I took the wrong path about a month ago to look for the channeling and couldn't find it. But I went on the top path, the higher path through there. From where I filmed Alan looking where the stream came out, that was from the higher path. But we cleared all that in order to show you where the channel was. That's why you can see a sort of the stream coming down. When we first arrived there, you couldn't see it at all. So we spent a good 10, 15 minutes clearing that so you could actually see the water flow down there. And so really those channelings are between the top path and the middle path. And I guess it must go on the lower path unless someone's taken them or broken them up or something like that.